Hi everybody, thanks for joining me as we prepare for the holiday of Passover. Now in the Passover Haggadah, we find an interesting thing. The Hallel is recited during the Passover Haggadah, on Seder night. However, the Hallel has been split into two parts. The first part of the Hallel is said after we tell the story Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim, about the Exodus from Egypt. At the end of that story, we say the first part of the Hallel before the meal. The second part of the Hallel, we say with the second part of the Haggadah after the meal. Why would our sages of blessed memory, who put the Haggadah Shel Pesach together, do it in such a way where the Hallel is split into two? Why not have the entire Hallel said together as it's usually done in the synagogues? Did you know that because of this situation of dividing the Hallel, that's why we don't recite a special bracha over the Hallel on Passover night? The famous Asher Kiddushanu b'mitzvah sav tzivanu likro es ha'Hallel, we don't, because many of the Rishonim maintain that how could I say that bracha before the first part and then stop and make a hefsek, an interruption, an entire meal, and then continue? So therefore we wind up losing out on the blessing over the Hallel. So I think the question is, it's a pretty good question. Put the entire Hallel together like we do all the time. The Levushay Mordechai shares with us an answer to this question. He says the first part of Hallel focuses on Yetzias Mitzrayim, the Exodus from Egypt. And therefore we say the first part of Hallel at the end of the first part of the Haggadah, telling the story, because the first part of the Haggadah focuses on the Exodus from Mitzrayim. How fitting it is to mention in the Hallel that discusses Mitzrayim with the part of the Haggadah that talks about Yetzias Mitzrayim. However, since the second half of the Haggadah speaks about other exiles and other redemptions, eventually the ultimate redemption from our current exile, we say the second part of Hallel with the second part of the Haggadah, because the second part of the Hallel, all those paragraphs have a thematic idea focusing on future exiles and future redemptions from those exiles. For example, in the second part of the Haggadah, that's when we get to the paragraph Shvoch Chamascha, to pour out your wrath. What do we do right before the recitation of that paragraph? We open the door. For who? For Eliyahu Hanavi. It's time for Elijah the prophet to come and be Mevaser Besuros Tovos, the good news about the coming of the Mashiach. And that just shows that at the second part of the Haggadah, we're talking about future redemptions, and therefore it's fitting to recite the second part of the Hallel, which the focus is on the other redemptions, and it really works out quite nicely. Although this answer is, I think, a very good answer, it brings us to a second question. And that is, why, Bichlal, do we have a second part of the Haggadah focusing on other redemptions from other exiles? What holiday are we celebrating right now? We're celebrating Passover. Passover is about the Exodus from Egypt. Why would we switch our focus away from the main idea, Passover, and a diversion? We're now speaking about other exiles and other redemptions from those exiles that we're thanking Hashem for. What do they have to do with the Passover Seder? The Bnei Yissaschar shares with us what I think is a fundamental teaching. He says that Galus Mitzrayim, the Egyptian exile, was the Galut HaKlali, the all-inclusive exile. It was the shoresh, the root of all future exiles, which means to say that all the pain and suffering that the Jewish people went through during the four exiles were wrapped up in one package, and the Jewish people in Mitzrayim experienced the compounded pain and suffering all at once during the Egyptian exile. And that's why, says the Bnei Yissaschar, there's even a hint in the pasuk, in the verse itself, to this idea, when it says in Parshas Shemos, Vayihi, and it was after Yamim Harabim Ha'eleh, it was after these many great days, the great days, many days we were in Mitzrayim. Says the Bnei Yissaschar, he cites the Megala Amukos and the Dorshei Reshumos. He says, what does it say there in the verse? It was after these many days in Mitzrayim. What's the word for many? The word is Rabim. How do you spell Rabim? 4 letters. Those 4 letters are Reish, Beis, Yud, Mem. And those 4 letters stand as an acronym for, Reish stands for Romi, the Roman exile. The Beis stands for Bavel, the Babylonian exile. The Yud stands for Yavan, the Greek exile. And the Mem stands for Madai, the Median exile. When it says the Jews were in Mitzrayim Yamim Rabim for many days, they were there for many days. Do you catch my drift? They were there for many days, all the days that the Jewish people went and suffered. Throughout the other 4 exiles, the Jewish people went through, during those days in Mitzrayim, the Jews went through all the other days as well, compounded. It was stuffed into one exile. That was the nature of Galus Mitzrayim. And therefore says the Bnei Yissaschar, if we had the capacity of surviving the Egyptian exile, then most definitely we certainly have the ability to survive any of the other exiles. If the Jewish people went through, had the wherewithal to survive the Egyptian exile, which is the compounded 4 exiles happening simultaneously all at once, then certainly we can get through any other exile that the nations are throwing at us, because each one is just a fourth, it's just a quarter of what we already went through. When we came out of Mitzrayim, it was imprinted in our spiritual DNA that we have the stuff that it takes to persevere and survive as a people, no matter what the nations intend on throwing at us. Which is why the Yerushalmi says in Psachim, why do we drink 4 cups of wine on Leil HaSeder? Rabbi Levi says those 4 cups of wine correspond the 4 Malchios, the 4 kingdoms that exiled the Jewish people, the 4 exiles, and the redemptions that we experienced. What are we drinking 4 cups of wine? Representing other Malchios, other Galios, other redemptions. What do they have to do with Mitzrayim? They have everything to do with Mitzrayim. Because once we mention that we came out of Mitzrayim, that we can certainly survive all the other Malchios, all the other Galios, the exiles as well. We already drink the cup of salvation and the cup of thanks, L'chaim. I'll drink to the thank you Hashem, even for the current exile that we have not yet been redeemed from, because we know that it's in the bag. Now, based on this, Bnei Yissaschar, I was thinking, this could answer a very strong question. Ask all of your friends, how many exiles did the Jewish people suffer through? Everybody's going to say 4. That's what the Midrash says. Every Midrash says the Jews went through 4 exiles. What were they? Bavel, Madai, Yavan, and Edom. Babylonian, Median, Greek, and Roman. The question is, whatever happened to Mitzrayim? No Midrash mentions that Mitzrayim is one of the Galios. But wait a second, there's a whole holiday we celebrate because of that exile. So there should be 5 Galios that the Jewish people went through, and it was the first one. We skip right over it. But based on this Bnei Yissaschar, the answer is phenomenal. Why is that so? Because our sages are teaching us there were or are only 4 exiles. Just once upon a time, those 4 exiles happened individually, separately. But once upon a time, those 4 exiles happened simultaneously. Mitzrayim is not a 5th, a separate, a different exile. It's all 4 combined into one. And if we survive that one, we could survive anything. And that's why, to explain the Levushay Mordechai, the Shvidei Pinchas says, that's why we split the Hallel into 2 parts. The first part of the Hallel, we thank Hashem for the redemption from Mitzrayim, from the Exodus from Egypt. But once we thank Hashem, He redeemed us from Egypt, we know that it's in the bag. We've got the stuff that it takes to persevere and survive anything. That's why the second part of the Hallel thanks Hashem for all the other redemptions, because they were linked to Mitzrayim. Mitzrayim broke the ice and paved the way. And even in this current exile, we already thank Hashem for the redemption because we know it's going to happen. It's just a matter of time. We as a people will survive. And this idea is more powerful for the Jewish people to learn to split this Hallel than to say that bracha. Okay, we lose out on the bracha. But more important, the Jewish people should realize we can survive this exile that we are going through. So everybody together, this Passover, like every Passover, there's a certain energy in the air. It's the energy, the atmosphere of Geula, of redemption. To the extent that we plug into the energy of Passover, to that degree we could experience redemption from our personal Mitzrayims. The stuff that we go through in our personal lives, the tsaros, the difficulties, are our modern day Mitzrayims. But to the extent that we get involved in the exodus from Egypt, we can draw from that reservoir of redemption, and hopefully it'll break the ice and we'll start to see much more salvation and rescue in our own personal lives. Let's all try, everybody, until this Passover, to study a little bit more. We all prepare for Pesach, but I don't just mean to prepare for Passover by cleaning our homes and places of work and automobiles from chametz, and that's important as well. I also mean to prepare what are we going to share at the Seder night with our family and friends and so on. Prepare. Let's prepare for that Seder, and let's tap into the energy of redemption, and let's try to go as long as we can on Passover night, preferably the entire night, all night long, telling the story of Yetzias Mitzrayim, because the more that we tap into this reservoir of redemption, to that extent we're going to see hopefully much more redemption in our personal lives. We should all be blessed, everybody, together to truly experience redemption in our personal lives, family issues, monetary issues, physical, medical issues. We should all experience together a tremendous redemption on the personal level and on the national level, and hopefully maybe this Passover we'll be able to celebrate together with the rest of the Jewish people in Eretz Yisrael, in Yerushalayim, at the Beis HaMikdash, with the Korban Pesach, speedily in our days. Amen. Thank you for joining me so much. This has been Rabbi Wagensberg.